The lash of the pine branches was a familiar cruelty. Ilara barely felt them anymore, not after the bite of the overseer's whip on the auction wagon. Pain was just a color in her world, a dull and constant gray that painted everything she saw. Freedom, however, was a sharp, terrifying blue, the color of the northern sky she was running toward, the color of the ice beginning to form on the edges of puddles. Her breath came in ragged clouds of white. Each one felt like a betrayal, a signal to the men she knew must be hunting her. She'd slipped from the wagon an hour ago, a desperate tumble into a ditch when the guards were distracted by a fallen horse. The fall had stolen the air from her lungs and added a galaxy of new bruises to her skin, but it had given her this desperate, freezing flight. The rags she wore, once a passable dress, were shredded. Mud and pine needles clung to her bare legs. The cold was a living thing, sinking its teeth into her ankles and crawling up her spine. She was a thing of no value. Her father, Lord Valerius, had told her so every day of her life. He'd said it when he'd struck her for spilling wine. He'd said it when he'd locked her in her room for speaking out of turn. And he'd said it with his final dismissive gesture as he sold her to the traders to settle a gambling debt. "She's worth more to you than she ever was to me." The words were a brand on her soul, hotter than any physical mark. She was unclaimed goods, damaged, worthless. And now she was running toward a place no one in their right mind would ever go, the Glimmerwood. Even the auction guards, cruel men with dead eyes, had spoken of it in hushed tones. A cursed forest, ruled by a beast the Alpha King himself had failed to tame. A monster of shadow and rage that could not, or would not, cross the Glimmerwood River that marked its territory. "The Alpha King's beast won't cross the river," the scouts had said. It was a local legend, a ghost story to frighten children. But the fear in the guards' voices had been real. It was a boundary, a place of no return. For Ilara, that sounded like a sanctuary. She stumbled through the undergrowth, her body screaming with 1,000 tiny agonies. The ground sloped downward, growing slick with damp moss. She could hear it now, a low murmur that grew into a steady rush. The river. Hope. A feeling so foreign it was painful, flickered in her chest. If she could cross it, they wouldn't follow. Their fear of the beast was greater than their desire to reclaim one piece of lost cargo. The trees thinned, and she saw it. The Glimmerwood River wasn't wide, but it was fast and dark, churning with the meltwater from the first mountain snows. A thin filigree of ice clung to the stones along the bank. It looked impossibly cold, a liquid blade that would slice the warmth from her body in seconds. She didn't hesitate. To stay was to be caught. To be caught was to be returned to the cage, to the auction block, to a life that was a slow, walking death. She preferred the quick one. Ilara took a staggering step into the water, and the cold was so sharp it felt like fire. It stole her breath, constricted her chest. She gasped, sucking in icy air. Her legs went numb almost instantly. She pushed forward, fighting the current that tried to tear her feet from the rocky bed. Halfway across, the water was at her waist, pulling at the rags of her dress. She was going to make it. Then her foot slipped. The world became a blur of churning black water and gray sky. The current seized her, pulling her under. The cold was absolute, a crushing weight. Her lungs burned. This is it, she thought, a strange calm settling over her. This is the end of being worthless. Her flailing hand struck something solid, a rock. She clung to it, fingers numb and clumsy, and managed to drag her head above the surface, coughing and sputtering. She was on the far side. She had crossed. With the last of her strength, she hauled her shivering body onto the bank, collapsing onto a bed of damp leaves and slick black stones. The air on her wet skin was a new kind of torture. A deep, bone-aching cold set in, and her shivering became uncontrollable. She tried to push herself up, to find shelter, but her limbs refused to obey. Her vision swam, the dark trunks of the Glimmerwood pines blurring into a single menacing wall. Darkness crept in at the edges of her sight. So this was how it ended. Not in a cage, but free. It was a small, bitter victory. Her eyes fluttered closed. A sound broke through the fog of her fading consciousness. A low growl, deep and resonant, that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath her. It wasn't the growl of a normal wolf. It was larger, heavier, laced with a chilling intelligence. The beast. Her eyes cracked open. It stood over her, a creature born of nightmare and winter. It was massive, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen, its form indistinct as if woven from shadow and moonlight. Its fur was the color of a starless midnight tipped with frost. But it was the eyes that held her. They glowed with a faint, pale light, like embers cooling in a dying fire. They weren't filled with mindless hunger. They were filled with confusion. It tilted its enormous head, a low rumble echoing in its chest. It took a step closer, and she saw that it was limping. Its left foreleg favored the ground, and a dark, ugly wound marred its shoulder, matted with blood and something that looked like splintered wood. Fear was a distant thing, buried under the crushing weight of cold. She was going to die. Here. Now. Killed by the monster everyone feared. A strange sense of injustice pricked through her apathy. She had survived her father. She had survived the auction. She had survived the river. To die now felt like a cosmic joke. She pushed herself up on one elbow, her body trembling violently, her gaze fixed on the wound. A piece of a spearhead, black and jagged, was embedded in its flesh. Poison. The edges of the wound were unnaturally dark. The beast watched her, its glowing eyes tracking her every small movement. It could kill her with a single swipe of its paw. It could snap her neck in its powerful jaws. It did nothing. It just watched. And in its stillness, she felt a profound and ancient suffering. It was as broken as she was. Section. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was because she saw a reflection of her own pain in this creature. Maybe it was because, having lost everything, she had nothing left to fear. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. She reached out a trembling blue-white hand. The beast flinched, a growl vibrating through its teeth. But it didn't pull away. Its heat rolled off it in waves, a startling contrast to the freezing air. It was a furnace wrapped in winter fur. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, brushed against the fur near the wound. It was thick and surprisingly soft. The beast shuddered but held its ground. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she gripped the jagged edge of the spearhead. It was slick with blood. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, more to herself than to the monster. She pulled. A roar of pure agony tore from the beast's throat, shaking the very trees. It was a sound of fury and torment that should have sent her scrambling away in terror. But she held on. The spearhead resisted, its barbs caught deep in muscle. The beast thrashed, its head whipping around, jaws snapping inches from her face. She closed her eyes, expecting the killing blow. It never came. She pulled again, putting the last of her will, the last of her life, into the motion. There was a sickening tear of flesh, and the spearhead came free in her hand. The beast collapsed, its massive form hitting the ground with a heavy thud. It lay panting, its glowing eyes fixed on her. The rage was gone, replaced by something that looked like shocked stillness. Ilara stared at the black, barbed metal in her hand, then let it drop. Her arm fell limp at her side. The last of her energy was gone. The world dissolved back into a gray, swimming blur. As her consciousness finally gave way, the last thing she felt was a wave of impossible heat as the great shadowy creature shifted its massive body, curling around her small, freezing form. She was not being attacked. She was being shielded from the wind. In the heart of the monster's den, she had unknowingly saved its life, and now it was saving hers. Warmth was the first thing she registered. A deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to be seeping into her bones, chasing out the deathly chill. It was a living heat, rising and falling with the slow, steady rhythm of breath. Ilara's eyes fluttered open. She was curled in a small ball, nestled against a wall of thick, black fur. The beast lay beside her, its massive body a bulwark against the wind. Its head was resting on its paws, those pale, glowing eyes watching her. The wound on its shoulder was still bleeding, but the dark, venomous look was fading from the edges. She should have been terrified. She was awake, lucid, and lying next to a monster of legend, but the terror wouldn't come. All she could feel was the life-giving heat and a strange sense of quiet that settled in her soul. She shifted, and a groan escaped her lips. Every muscle ached. The beast's ears twitched. It lifted its head, a low rumble in its chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It was questioning. "I'm alive," she whispered, the words scraping her throat. The beast huffed, a plume of warm air ghosting over her face. It smelled of pine, cold stone, and something else. Something uniquely its own. A scent of ozone after a lightning strike, of deep earth and winter storms. Slowly, carefully, she sat up. The rags of her dress were still damp, but the beast's body heat had dried them in patches. She looked around. They were in a shallow overhang of rock, a natural den that offered some shelter from the elements. Outside, the northern wilderness was a stark tapestry of gray sky and dark green pines. She was alone with it. This was its territory, the place no one dared to enter. And she was still breathing. Trust was a foreign concept to her. It was a word for other people, for those who hadn't learned that love was a weapon and kindness a lie. But here, in the heart of danger, something else was taking root. A fragile reliance born of shared survival. This creature hadn't killed her. It had saved her. Its eyes were fixed on her, intelligent and assessing. It was not a mindless animal. There was a mind in there, a will, trapped. Days blurred into a strange routine. They were thrown together in a crucible of survival. The beast, she started calling him Shadow in her mind, would disappear for hours and return with food. A rabbit, a brace of squirrels, once a whole fish, dropped carefully near her. It never ate until she had taken her share, which she cooked over a small, smoky fire she managed to start with a piece of flint she found. She used a strip of her own tattered dress to clean his wound as best she could. He bore her touch with a tense stillness, a low growl, a constant reminder of the power he held in check. But he let her. He let her tend to him, a silent agreement passing between them. Her fear began to erode, replaced by a profound curiosity. Who was he? What was he? The legend said the Alpha King had failed to tame him, but this creature didn't feel wild. It felt imprisoned. The river remained their boundary. He would not cross it. She discovered she could. One day, driven by the need for better supplies, she waded back across the churning water. He followed her to the very edge, a distressed whine rumbling in his chest as he watched her go. He paced the bank, a frantic energy in his movements, until she returned with an old blanket and a rusted pot from an abandoned trapper's cabin she'd found a mile away. The moment her feet touched his side of the riverbank, the tension left him. He nudged her with his great head, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle it made her heart ache. "It's okay, Shadow," she found herself saying, her voice soft. I came back. She started talking to him constantly, filling the vast, lonely silence of the woods with the sound of her voice. She told him about her father, about the auction, about the crushing weight of being deemed worthless. She spoke of things she had never told another living soul. He would lie with his head on his paws, his glowing eyes never leaving her face, listening. He was the best listener she had ever known. One night, the first real snow began to fall. The world went silent, muffled under a blanket of white. The cold deepened, and even with the fire, she shivered. Shadow shifted closer, draping his massive, warm body half over her, sharing his impossible heat. Tucked against him, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat, she felt safer than she had in her entire life. It was then that the first crisis struck. He began to tremble. A low, pained moan escaped his throat. The glow in his eyes intensified, flickering like a faulty lantern. He scrambled to his feet, staggering away from her and the fire, his body contorting. The shadows that clung to his form writhed and coiled, seeming to solidify and then dissolve. It was the curse. She knew it instinctively. It was trying to consume him. He collapsed, howling in agony, a sound that was half wolf and half something terrifyingly human. He thrashed in the snow, his powerful limbs flailing. Alara didn't think. She ran to him, her own safety an afterthought. "Shadow!" she cried, falling to her knees beside his writhing form. "It's okay, I'm here." She placed her hands on his heaving side. The fur was hot, burning with a feverish energy. The shadows seemed to lash out at her touch, but she held firm. She pressed her cheek against his neck, trying to offer what little comfort she could. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please, don't go." His struggles began to subside. His breathing was ragged, his whole body shuddering with the aftermath. The intense glow in his eyes faded back to its normal, soft light. He was exhausted, drained. He lay limp in the snow, looking up at her with an expression of raw vulnerability. And then he spoke. It was not a growl, not a whine. It was a word, forced from a throat unused to speech, rough and broken. Kaelin. The name hung in the frozen air between them. It was his. His name. He had given it to her. It was a piece of himself, an offering of trust so profound it shattered the last of her fear. "Kaelin," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. She stroked the thick fur of his neck. "I'm Alara." He closed his eyes, a long sigh escaping him. The intimacy of that moment, the sharing of names in the desolate, frozen wilderness, was more powerful than any touch she had ever known. A bond was forging between them, hammered into shape by crisis and trust. In the days that followed, something shifted. The wall between them, the boundary of beast and girl, had been irrevocably breached. He was Kaelin, a person trapped inside a monstrous form. The political trap he was in, the enemies closing in. She couldn't guess at the specifics. But she understood the result. This curse was his cage, and it was slowly killing him. Her presence, her touch, seemed to soothe it, to hold it at bay. She was his anchor in a storm of dark magic. They found the pup a week later, a tiny ball of gray fur, shivering and alone beside the frozen bodies of its parents, hunters. Their snares were still nearby. The same kind of men who had chased her. The same kind who had likely shot Kaelin with that poisoned spear. The pup let out a pitiful whine, too weak to even run. Alara's heart broke. She scooped it up, holding it against her chest for warmth. It was impossibly small, its little body trembling. Kaelin, in his beast form, approached cautiously. He lowered his massive head to sniff the pup. A low growl started in his chest. He saw it as a competitor for resources, a weakness. "No," Alara said, her voice firm. She looked him directly in the eye, shielding the pup with her body. "We're not leaving it. It's alone." He stared at her, then at the tiny creature in her arms. He saw the fierce, protective light in her eyes. He saw her kindness, a quality the world had tried so hard to beat out of her. And in that moment, something in his beastly heart yielded. He huffed, a resigned sound, and nudged her hand with his nose before turning to lead the way back to their den. They had a family, a strange, broken wilderness family of a cursed man, a runaway girl, and an orphaned wolf pup. The pup became their shared project, a point of light in the darkness. Alara cared for it, fed it scraps of meat. Kalen, surprisingly, became its guardian. He would lie with his body curled around the spot where the pup slept, a silent, shadowy protector. One evening, they sat by the fire. The pup was asleep, nestled in the blankets. Alara was stitching a tear in the blanket with a sharpened twig and a thread pulled from the hem. Kalen lay nearby, his head on his paws, watching her. The firelight danced in his pale eyes. A feeling swelled in her chest, so powerful it almost choked her. It was a fierce, protective thing. A feeling of belonging. She looked at him, this monster who had shown her more kindness than any human, this king in a cage of fur and shadow. He seemed to feel the shift in her. He lifted his head, his gaze intense. He couldn't speak in full sentences, not in this form. The curse held his tongue. But his eyes, his entire being, communicated what he felt. He pushed himself closer, nudging his head under her hand. A single possessive word rumbled from his chest, a declaration more potent than any flowery poem. Mine. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a statement of fact, of belonging. You are mine, and I am yours. Tears welled in her eyes. The girl who was worth nothing, the girl who was sold like cattle. She was, to this powerful, broken creature, everything. Stay. He growled softly, a plea. Don't leave me. I will, she whispered, her voice breaking. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to the fur on his brow. It was a kiss of acceptance, a promise made in the heart of the wild. It wasn't a cure. It didn't break the curse. But it was a bond. And in the silent, snow-filled forest, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she loved him. An early confession, not of words, but of will. And it made the future, whatever it held, both terrifying and worth fighting for. The peace they had carved out of the wilderness was as fragile as a skin of ice on the river. Alara knew it, felt it in the quiet moments when the wind sounded too much like a man's shout, or a snapping twig made her heart leap into her throat. Her past was not a ghost. It was a hunter, and it was still tracking her. The first sign was the traps. More of them, newer, crueler. They found a young doe caught in a snare, its leg broken. Kalen, with a guttural roar of fury, tore the metal wire from the tree and stood over the suffering animal. There was nothing they could do. He ended its pain with a swift, merciful bite to the neck, a grim task that left him pacing and agitated for hours. The hunters were pushing deeper into his territory, into their home. Then they found footprints, human footprints, in the snow near the river. Not the old, faded tracks of the long-gone trapper. These were fresh. A group of men. They had come to the river's edge and stopped, unwilling to cross. They were scouting, searching. For him? Or for her? The answer came a few days later. Alara was gathering firewood, the pup nipping at her heels when she heard voices. Sharp, ugly sounds that cut through the sacred quiet of the Glimmerwood. She froze, grabbing the pup and silencing it with a hand over its muzzle. She crouched behind a thicket of snow-laden firs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Two men, clad in leather and dark furs, stepped into the clearing. They carried crossbows. Their faces were hard, familiar in the way that all cruel men looked alike. "Saw tracks over here," one said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Small ones. Could be the girl." Lord Valerius wants her back, the other spat. Can't believe she ran this way. Into the beast's den. Maybe the beast got her. Solves a problem for us. No, the orders from the councilmen are clear. The girl is valuable now. They say she's been seen with the beast. That she's tamed it. They want to know how. The blood went cold in Ilara's veins. Lord Valerius, her father. He hadn't just sold her. He was hunting her. And he wasn't alone. A councilman. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The hunters, the poison, the curse. This wasn't random. It was a coordinated attack. Kaylin's enemies weren't just closing in. They were using her father as their dog. She backed away slowly, silently, the pup held tight against her chest. She had to warn Kaylin. She ran, heedless of the noise she was making, branches whipping at her face. She burst back into the den, breathless and terrified. Kaylin was instantly on his feet, a low growl building in his throat as he sensed her panic. "Men," she gasped, clutching his thick fur. "Hunters. They're looking for me. My father sent them." The name father made the growl in his chest deepen, vibrating with a possessive fury. He understood. The evil from her past had followed her here. He nudged her toward the back of the den, a clear command to hide. He turned to face the entrance, his massive body a living shield. His form seemed to darken, the shadows around him coalescing. He was ready for a fight. But they didn't come for them that day. It was a waiting game, a tightening of a noose. The threat was no longer a distant fear. It was a physical presence, patrolling the edges of their sanctuary. The villain, her own father, was about to win. The attack came at dusk, when the light was failing and the shadows were long. It was brutally efficient. They didn't come from the front. They came from above, rappelling down the rock face behind the den. A heavy, weighted net dropped from the sky. Kaylin roared as it fell over him, but this was no ordinary rope. It was woven with threads of silver, and the moment it touched his skin, it sizzled. A scream of agony, raw and chilling, was torn from him as the metal burned into his cursed form. He thrashed, but the net was heavy and tangled, and every movement only tightened its burning grip. Men swarmed the den. Ilara screamed, grabbing a burning log from the fire, a pathetic weapon. Before she could even swing it, a hand seized her arm, twisting it behind her back. Well, look what the beast dragged in. The voice was poison in her ears. She looked up into the cold, sneering face of her father, Lord Valerius. He was dressed in fine, dark leathers, looking more like a warlord than the minor nobleman he was. "Father," she choked out. "Don't call me that," he snapped, his grip tightening until she cried out in pain. "You are a commodity, and you have become far more valuable than I ever imagined." He looked past her at Kaylin, who was still struggling, his roars weakening into pained groans. The silver was doing more than burning him. It was draining him, suppressing the magic of the curse and his life force with it. "To think, the great Alpha King, laid low by a simple net," Valerius mocked. "The council will be very pleased." They were right. His bond with you made him predictable, vulnerable. The Alpha King. The words hit her like a physical blow. Shadow. Kaylin. The monster in the woods was the ruler of the entire northern Pax, the man whose scouts had feared this very forest. And he was bonded to her. The worthless girl. Valerius shoved her forward, toward the entrance of the den. "You're coming with me. We have uses for a girl who can leash a king." "No!" she screamed, trying to claw her way back toward Kaylin. "Let him go." Behind her, Kaylin let out one last desperate roar, his glowing eyes locking on hers. It was a look of pure, helpless fury and a heartbreaking plea. "Don't take her." Valerius laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He dragged her out of the den and into the twilight, where more of his men waited. He didn't even look back at the trapped, wounded king. "Leave him!" Valerius commanded his men. "The council's agents will be here soon to collect their prize. Let him suffer." They tied her hands and forced her to march. The pup, forgotten in the chaos, ran out after them, yapping and growling with a courage far beyond its size. One of Valerius's men aimed a kick at it. "Don't!" Ilara screamed. Valerius paused. He looked at the pup, then at Ilara's terrified face. A slow, malicious smile spread across his lips. "Bring the mutt," he said. Another point of leverage. She was separated from him, torn away. Kaelin was trapped, dying, and she was a prisoner once more. Her father, the architect of all her pain, had won. He was marching her back into the darkness, and this time she was leaving her heart, her hope, her entire world behind, burning in a silver net. The cold that settled in her chest was worse than any winter. It was the absolute zero of despair. The keep of Lord Valerius was a place built from the stones of her childhood nightmares. Every hallway echoed with the memory of a cruel word. Every shadow held the ghost of a lonely, frightened girl. Being back here was a special kind of torture, a suffocation of the soul. Her father had locked her in her old room. It was just as she remembered it. Small, cold, with a single barred window overlooking a bleak courtyard. The fine dress he'd forced her into felt like a costume for a corpse. He was keeping her, showing her off, a prize he had captured. The pup was locked in with her, a small, warm, trembling body that was her only connection to the life she had been torn from. She held it close, burying her face in its soft fur, trying not to think of Kaelin, trying not to imagine him alone in the woods, wounded, the silver eating away at his strength. Was he even still alive? The thought was a blade in her gut. She had to believe he was. She had to. The bond between them, the fragile thing forged in fire and snow, was a thin, taut wire stretched across the distance. She couldn't feel him clearly, the connection muted and distorted by pain and fear, but it wasn't severed. Not yet. This was her crisis. Powerless, a prisoner, while the man she loved faced death alone. She paced the room, a caged animal, her mind racing. She was no longer the broken girl who had fled into the woods. She had faced death and a monster, and found love in the heart of both. She would not break now. Her father visited her once. He didn't come to gloat. He came with a purpose. "Councilman Darien is arriving tomorrow," he said, standing in the doorway flanked by guards. "He is a very important man, an advisor to the throne. He is the one who engineered the king's predicament. He is very interested in meeting you." "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice low and steady. The fear was there, but rage was a hot shield around it. "Want?" He laughed. "I want what you will give me. Power. Position. The councilman has promised me a seat at his right hand when Kaelin is gone and the throne is his. You are the key to that." He saw her only as a tool. A key to unlock his ambition. He was selling her all over again, but this time for a kingdom instead of coin. The next day, Councilman Darien arrived. He was a stark contrast to her father's brutish cruelty. He was slender, elegant, with silver hair and eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. He dismissed the guards and entered her room alone, his movements smooth and predatory. "Ilara," he said, his voice a silken whisper, "I have heard so much about you, the little stray who captured a king's heart." He circled her slowly. She stood her ground, holding the pup tighter. His gaze was unnervingly sharp, analytical. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you?" he continued, a faint condescending smile on his lips. "Kaelin's bloodline is cursed, has been for generations. They are strong, yes, but their strength is tied to their bond. When they mate, their power doubles. But it also creates a vulnerability, An anchor. An anchor I have learned how to poison. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. The curse I laid upon him traps him in that beastly form, slowly devouring his humanity, his very soul. Your presence, your bond, it grounded him. It slowed the decay. Without you, he shrugged elegantly, he will burn out from the inside. The silver net was merely an accelerant. By now, I imagine there is very little left of the man you knew. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. He was confirming her deepest fears. Kaelin was dying, and she was the reason. Her capture had doomed him. "What about the pup?" she asked, her voice trembling, desperate to change the subject, to focus on the one small life she might still be able to protect. Darian glanced at the trembling bundle in her arms. "Ah, yes. The wolf. Your father wants it destroyed. A loose end. But I find it poetically useful. The Alpha King's chosen mate, protecting an orphaned pup. It's a symbol, and symbols are powerful." His eyes glinted. "I will make you a deal. Your father is a blunt instrument. I am a statesman. I have no desire to see you harmed. Publicly swear your allegiance to me. Accept my authority when I claim the regency. Do this, and I will spare the pup. I will even give you a comfortable life. A gilded cage is still a cage, I know, but it is far better than the alternative your father has planned for you." It was a choice between two prisons, one of servitude, the other of death. And all the while, Kaelin was fading. She stared at the councilman, at his calm, cruel face. He was the true villain, the spider at the center of the web. Her father was just one of his fangs. "No," she said. His smile faltered. "No. I will not help you. I will not be your symbol or your tool." Darian's face hardened, the mask of civility dropping away to reveal the cold fury beneath. "A foolish choice. You have sealed your own fate, and the pup's as well. Your father can have his way with you both." He turned and swept from the room, leaving her alone with the echoing finality of his words. She was out of time. She had to do something. But she was locked in, guarded, and helpless. The weight of it was crushing. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold stone wall, the pup whining in her arms. She had failed him. She had failed this innocent life. The crisis was here, and she was drowning in it. The morning of her breaking point dawned gray and unforgiving. The guards came for her not long after sunrise. They didn't speak, just unlocked her door and motioned for her to come out. Their faces were grim. She clutched the pup to her chest, refusing to let it go. To her surprise, they didn't force the issue. They marched her down the cold stone corridors and out into the central courtyard. It was filled with her father's household guards and servants, all assembled as if for a proclamation. Her father, Lord Valerius, stood on the top step of the main entrance, his chest puffed out, a cruel parody of a king addressing his subjects. Councilman Darian stood beside him, a silent, observing specter. "Bring her forward," Valerius boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The guards shoved her into the center of the courtyard. She stumbled, but caught her footing, standing tall despite the terror coiling in her stomach. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her, pitying, scornful, indifferent. "This is my daughter," Valerius announced, his voice dripping with contempt. "A traitor to her own blood. She fled from her duties and consorted with the cursed beast that has plagued our lands. She abandoned her family for a monster. He was putting her on trial, humiliating her before he destroyed her. She was given a chance to repent," he continued, gesturing toward Darian. "A chance to serve the new order of this kingdom. She refused. Such defiance, such treachery, cannot be tolerated." He started to descend the steps, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. This was it. He was going to make an example of her. He stopped in front of her, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. "You have always been a disappointment," he snarled, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Worthless, defiant. I should have drowned you at birth." This was the moment, the confrontation she had been running from her entire life. Her abuser standing before her, ready to deliver the final blow. All the pain, all the fear, all the years of being told she was nothing, coalesced into a single point of burning pressure in her chest. But something else was there, too. The memory of Kalen's warmth, the feel of his name on her lips, the fierce, protective love for the king in the beast's skin, and for the tiny, innocent life she held in her arms. Love was not a weakness. It was her armor. "First," Valerius said, his voice rising for the crowd again, "we will dispose of this stray she so foolishly protects." He reached for the pup. Alara reacted without thinking. She spun away, shielding the pup with her body. "No." The word was not a plea. It was a command. It ripped from her throat, raw and powerful, filled with all the rage and love she possessed. Valerius's face contorted in fury. He raised his hand to strike her, to backhand her into submission as he had done 1,000 times before. "You dare!" As his hand swung toward her face, she raised her own to block it. Her palm, slick with nervous sweat, slapped against the cold, damp stone of the courtyard wall behind her as she recoiled. She touched the ancient stone her ancestors had laid, and the world went silent. It wasn't a sound. It was an absence of it. A wave of pure, silent energy erupted from her point of contact with the wall. It was not fire or light. It was truth. A resonance that shook the very foundations of the keep and the lies it was built on. The silver manacles on her wrists, symbols of her bondage, didn't just break. They dissolved into dust. The wave of power pulsed outward. It wasn't destructive. It was clarifying. Every guard in the courtyard suddenly saw Valerius not as their lord, but as a petty, cruel tyrant. They saw Darian not as a wise councilman, but as a usurper filled with cold ambition. The glamour of authority was stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth of the men beneath. Her hidden power, the dormant ability of her bloodline, was awake. It was a power of nullification. It didn't create or destroy. It undid. It unmade lies, illusions, and curses. Across the miles, deep in the Glimmerwood, the wave of silent truth washed over a dying king. The silver net, a construct of dark magic and malice, ceased to exist. It crumbled into a pile of gray ash. The curse, the intricate web of lies woven into his very being, began to unravel. The agonizing pressure in his soul eased. The path back to himself, back to his human form, was suddenly clear. He could feel her, Alara, a beacon of pure, unwavering reality in a world of deception. Back in the courtyard, everyone was frozen, stunned by the silent, invisible force that had swept through them. Valerius stared at his hand, then at her, his face a mask of disbelief and sudden, dawning fear. Alara stood straight, the pup safe in her arms. She was no longer trembling. The worthless girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had just discovered the weapon she was born to wield. She looked at her father, at the man who had built his life on cruelty and lies, and she knew his reign was over. The breaking point had come, and it had not broken her. It had forged her. The reunion was not a quiet, tender thing. It was a storm. Kalen, freed from the silver net, felt the curse recede just enough. The agonizing pressure that had pinned him in his monstrous form eased, and for the first time in years he felt the shift come willingly. It was painful, a violent reshaping of bone and sinew, but it was a release. He collapsed in the dirt of his den, no longer a beast of shadow, but a man. He was naked, scarred, and weakened, but he was himself. He was the Alpha King. He could feel Alara, her power, a lighthouse beam cutting through the fog of his pain. He could feel her fear, her rage, and her triumph. And he could feel her danger. He let out a true howl, not the guttural roar of the beast, but the summoning call of an alpha. It echoed through the Glimmerwood, across the river, and over the plains. An answer came almost immediately from his loyalists, his royal guard, who had been searching for him, blocked by the curse and the lies of the council. Now the path was clear. Now their king was calling them home. In the courtyard of her father's keep, Alara faced him. The guards were hesitant, their allegiance shattered by the wave of truth she had unleashed. They looked from her to Valerius, their expressions confused and wary. "What was that?" Valerius stammered, taking a step back. "What are you?" "I am your daughter," she said, her voice clear and ringing with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "And I will not let you hurt anyone ever again." Councilman Darien recovered first. His ambition was a stronger shield than the guard's simple loyalty. "Kill her!" he shrieked, his composure shattering. "She's a witch! Kill her now!" But the guards didn't move. They could feel the lie in his words, just as they could feel the undeniable truth in hers. Alara took a step forward, and another. She didn't raise a hand. She didn't need to. Her power was in her presence, in her gaze. She focused on her father, the source of her oldest pain. "You built this house on fear," she said, her voice resonating with that same quiet power. "You built your authority on lies. You told me I was worthless to make yourself feel strong." With every word, he seemed to shrink. The blustering, tyrannical lord deflated, leaving a small, pathetic man in his place. His own men looked at him with contempt. Her power didn't harm him physically. It simply unmade his identity, stripping him bare for all to see. It was then that the horns sounded from outside the keep walls. Loud, clear, and filled with purpose, the horns of the king's guard. The gates of the keep burst inward, splintering under the force of a battering ram. Wolves, massive northern pack wolves, poured into the courtyard, followed by warriors in the king's black and silver. At their head was Kalen. He was pale and gaunt, leaning on the shoulder of one of his guards for support, but he was on his feet. He was in his human form. His eyes, no longer glowing with a ghostly light but a fierce amber gold, found her across the chaos. Time seemed to stop. He saw her, standing whole and defiant, the pup in her arms, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes blazing with newfound power. She saw him, the man beneath the monster, more beautiful and more real than she could have ever imagined. He was all harsh lines and raw strength, a king forged in winter and war. He pushed himself off his guard and strode toward her, his path clearing as warriors and wolves fell back before him. He didn't stop until he was standing in front of her. He looked down at her, his expression a maelstrom of relief, awe, and a love so fierce it took her breath away. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before gently cupping her cheek. His skin was warm. "You were never worthless," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp, but it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "You were the key. You were always the key." She leaned into his touch, a sob of relief escaping her. "I thought you were gone." "You called me back," he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin. He looked at the cowering forms of her father and Councilman Darien, who were now surrounded by royal guards. "Justice will be done." He looked back at her, his focus entirely on her. "I have you." It was a promise, a vow. It meant thank you. It meant I love you. It meant we are safe now. She held his gaze, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "And I have you," she whispered. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation or survival. It was a kiss of arrival. A king and his queen, a man and his woman, reunited in the ruins of the lies that had kept them apart. The pup, nestled between them, licked her chin, and for the first time Alara laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. The world was not yet perfect, but it was theirs, and they were finally home. 3 months later, the first thaws of spring had come to the north. The snows receded, revealing a land greening with new life. The Glimmerwood River, once a symbol of Kaelin's imprisonment, now flowed clear and bright under the sun. In the great hall of the Citadel, the Alpha King's throne room, the world had been remade. The chill of fear that had permeated the court under Darien's shadow influence was gone, replaced by a buzzing, vibrant loyalty. Councilman Darien and Lord Valerius were gone, exiled to the frozen wastes in the furthest north, a fate Kaelin had deemed more fitting than a quick death. They were stripped of their names, their lands, their power. Unmade, just as Alara's power had unmade their authority. Alara stood by the high arched window, looking out over the capital city. She was no longer in rags, but a simple gown of deep forest green. She was the queen, a title that still felt strange on her tongue, but the role felt as natural as breathing. Her power, now that she understood it, was a quiet, constant presence. She was the kingdom's anchor of truth, a living lie detector that made intrigue and deception impossible near the throne. The pack, the entire kingdom, revered her for it. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind. A familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "What does my queen see?" Kaelin's voice was a low rumble against her ear, no longer rough, but rich and warm. "A new season," she replied, leaning back against his solid chest. His health was fully restored, the curse completely broken by their bond, now whole and unbroken. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, steady warmth that was reserved only for her. "Everything is new," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. A playful yip sounded from the foot of the throne. The pup, no longer small but a lanky, half-grown wolf, was chewing on the leg of a ceremonial chair. He was named Shadow now, a fond memory of a dark time. "Shadow, no," Alara chided gently. The young wolf dropped the chair leg, trotted over, and nudged his head against her hand, tail wagging. Kaelin chuckled. "He has your defiant spirit," he murmured. "And your habit of ignoring the rules," she retorted, a smile in her voice. They stood there for a long moment in comfortable silence, watching the city awaken. She was no longer the girl on the run, the worthless, unclaimed property. She was a queen, loved and respected. She had a home, a pack, a family. She had found her worth not because a king had chosen her, but because she had chosen to be brave, to be kind, and to fight for what she loved. He hadn't just saved her from her past, she had saved him from his. It was a mutual rescue, a perfect balance. "The scouts from the Southern Reach are due to report today," Kaelin said, his tone shifting from husband to king. "There is talk of unrest on their borders." A hint of a new adventure, a new challenge. But this time, she felt no fear. There would always be threats. There would always be politics and dangers. But they would face them together. She turned in his arms to face him, placing her hands on his chest. She looked into his amber gold eyes, the eyes of her king, her partner, her Kaelin. "Then we will hear them," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Together." He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that was like the sun breaking through after a long winter. He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, deep kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. The world outside could bring its storms. Here, in his arms, in their new world, she was finally, irrevocably, home.